In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains builds, operates, and maintains electric transmission infrastructure, connecting consumers to lower-cost energy sources to power our energy future. That means safe, secure, reliable electricity for those we serve. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.
Kansas Legislature show right here at Smoky Hills Public Television in downtown Bunker Hill. We appreciate you joining us this evening. I'm Becky Kaiser, and I would like to thank you for being with us and let you know that I am from Hays, Kansas. I work for Eagle Communications, also Eagle Radio, Hays, and Hays Post. And we want to thank our partners for the show, again, ITC and the Docking Institute of Public Affairs at Fort Hays State University, where I am actually a fellow. We appreciate them helping us with the show this evening. Most importantly, we want to say thank you to our guests that are joining us this evening, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves after I talk about them just a little bit and find out what kind of work they've been doing on the legislature and what they're looking at. We're a little bit past the halfway point at this time, so things are starting to ramp up even more than they have been. Joining us for the very first time in the Kansas Legislature on the end here away from me, the furthest away, is Representative Jim Minnix, who is a Republican from Scott City, District 118, and he has been very busy, especially in the first part of the session, talking about water. He is the chairman of the House Water Committee, so we'll find out a little bit more about where that is standing. Also, a very familiar face to the show this evening, Representative Troy Waymaster, who is Republican from Bunker Hill, District 109. And then also joining us this evening is one of our favorite senators who comes to visit us once in a while, Elaine Bowers, is a Republican from Concordia, and that is District 36. So let's go back, and Jim, since you're brand new to the show, welcome once again. And as I had already mentioned, of course, you are chairman of the House Water Committee, which I know has kept you very busy, especially in the beginning of the session. But tell us a little bit about yourself for those who do not know you.
I'm a farmer and a rancher in southwest part of Scott County. I represent the 118th district, which includes Greeley, Wichita, Scott, Lane, Ness, Logan, Gove, Trigo, and Sheridan counties. It's the largest geographical House district in the state. We still have 23,000 population within those 9 counties. As a cattle producer and a farmer, I have dry land and irrigated ground. I was a Scott County Commissioner for 26 years. So I had quite a few years of local government. I'm enjoying I enjoyed my freshman term in the House the first 2 years, and I've been a little extra busy here in the 3rd year. But it's nice to be here this evening. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, and again, and welcome. And Troy, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're our budget man, and you're always busy.
Yeah, it seems like it. Troy Waymaster, the representative for the 109th Kansas House District, which includes the entire counties of Smith, Osborne, Russell, Lincoln, and Ellsworth. Ellsworth was the newest county that I picked up with redistricting, which I was glad to see 5 entire counties, because I did have 7, and 3 of those were partial counties in my previous 109th Kansas House District. But I am the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee. And so this year has had its challenges in regards to the budget, which is a little bit different than in previous years. Because when I started as the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee in 2017, we were actually entering session with almost an $800 million deficit. And this year, in fiscal year 2024, when we started session, you were looking at over a $3 billion ending surplus. And it has challenges because everybody is wanting a part of that pot of money. And so we've been very diligent on all of the budget committees. We have 5 budget committees within House Appropriations, and they've been going through all the 92 budgets for the state of Kansas with state agencies and departments. We finally wrapped the last one up on Wednesday of this week, and that was post-secondary education. So all of your regent universities, your community colleges, your technical colleges, So we wrapped that up. So we're done with the budget reporting process. On Tuesday, we go into the Appropriations Committee and actually start piecing the state budget back together.
And everybody wants a piece of that.
And everybody wants a piece of it, yes.
And again, also joining us this evening, Senator Elaine Bowers from Concordia. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Elaine, and what you've been working on.
Well, thank you, Becky, and thanks for having us this evening. This is very comfortable friends that we can just chat here. I serve on 4 committees in the Senate, and I should mention I've been in the Capitol 17 years now. I came from the House, so I understand what the fellows here are doing, and now the Senate, and I serve on my 4 committees starting at 8:30, and we were just joking about Senate time. Our committees are 1 hour exactly, and they start 1 hour exactly. So you have movement in between the committees, so we have no breaks. Like these fellows do get a break. So when
Lasts 2 hours.
yes, so that's true. Yeah, especially yours, I'm sure
yeah.
too.
Or
So
more,
yeah. In real life, I'm an automobile dealer in Concordia and Beloit. I'm on the Transportation Committee, which I feel just perfect on there. Chairman of Ethics and Local Government, Vice Chair, and then serve on Judiciary and Utilities. And all of those touch rural Kansas in some way or the other. And I have a few great bills to tell you about coming out of the committees when we get to hop into those.
All right, we'll look forward to that. Well, first of all, I wanted to start with, I guess we could call it breaking news, because this actually occurred earlier today, late this afternoon actually, that we had some action from the governor's office regarding House Bill 2238, which is known as Fairness in Women's Sports Act, and she actually vetoed that. That, again, as you might remember, would have required women's student athletic team members to be biologically female. First of all, may I ask how you voted on that from the House?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
And yes.
And yes, okay, so this, all houses voted, and then that was a veto. 3 yeses, and there's some concern about whether or not there might be a possibility to override that. Troy?
And we don't think this is unexpected at all
No.
during our conversations in the hallway. So go ahead, Troy.
Well, and I would say it's going to first go to the House because it was a House bill. And when we actually passed that out, it was 82 to 40. There were some members missing. And so when you're looking at it, we have 84 Republicans, and that takes 84 to override the governor's veto. I know there were 2 Republicans that didn't vote for it. So we do have, I believe, 2 Republicans who are going to be coming back, but then you're trying to figure out where those other 2 came from. So it had to be 2 Democrats voted for it that won't vote for it again. So it's going to be a challenge to get to the ability to override the governor's veto. As Elaine kind of alluded to, this was expected. This is the 3rd year we've had this type of legislation. Twice prior, she's vetoed it, so I think there was all anticipation that she would veto it again. So it really didn't come as a surprise when the governor did use her veto pen this afternoon and veto this particular bill.
Well, we'll see what happens on the possibility of that. And if you have any questions about that possible override or anything that you would like to ask the legislators this evening, perhaps you have a question or a comment that you would like to make about some legislation, we have a toll-free number that you can call us, 1-800-337-4788, and you can voice your opinion this evening.
I might mention that it was 28 to 11 in the Senate, so that's one over the 27 is what we need, so the Senate
It is already one over, okay.
Yes, so it would be the House first with their version
Right.
coming back over to us.
And I will say tonight, Elaine and I were actually greeters at the Luray Fish Fry, the first time that they've had it in 3 years, and this issue came up. And,
Did it?
And it was a
lot
lot
of interest?
A lot of people asking us, "Are you going to be able to override the governor?" And that was, whenever somebody brought up this issue, that was their sentiment: is we need to override the governor, but it comes down to the numbers and the members in the chambers whether or not they will.
Is there any sort of time deadline on that you have to have numbers together to do an override?
There is it is time sensitive. We have to have a veto override within a certain period of time, right?
Yes, and
Yeah.
I'm not certain what that is.
And so there's only a certain amount of date, and we can take the veto override up.
Okay.
We would expect it this week,
Yeah.
I'm sure,
Oh,
when
okay,
we're back.
already. All right. Well, Elaine, let's move on to you. You said you had some exciting things that you wanted to share with us. Tell us what's been going on with some of these bills.
Well, one really interesting one that I've been involved with a 3 years, and it's the blinking lights on our wind turbines. Is one of the most distracting, irritant, you could say, of the whole wind industry. So we hear about this across the state, but particularly in the eastern part of Senate District 36. And I failed to mention Senate District 36 is 13 counties, soon to be 14 counties in 2 years after the re-election. So I will be tied with Senator Rick Billinger for having the largest Senate seat, so across the top of Kansas. So if you particularly look, although we have them here in western Kansas too, but a really strong concentration in, say, Marshall County, Washington Republic, that's just being built. So I was charged with the idea of a select committee over the summer on how do we turn off these lights. So in one-day committee, we heard from federal people, state people, went back to the history of wind turbines in Kansas and what the incentives were, where they fell in our local government. We searched all this out, and we did learn there are two national companies that make a system called ADLS, Aircraft Detention Lighting System. And this new technology will turn off the lights if there's no aircraft in the area. So to take one problem off the table that our county commissioners, because these decisions are made at the local level if a farm does come to your county, that one less item that they will have to work with. And the build is two things. It's prospective moving forward, so all new builds would have to have these lights, and then retro, which is the tricky part because these turbines are under contracts already. Without being punitive, that when these farms were built, they followed the law at that time.
Right.
And how do you go back and force them to do this? It's about $1.5 million a farm, and it's a special radar system. It can detect an airplane out over 3.5 miles to 4 miles. Very sensitive. It even picks up flocks of geese flying in. So it's passed out of the Senate 39-1, then had a hearing on Thursday in the Utilities Committee and Energy in the House. So right now it's had its hearing. They'll be waiting for a committee vote and then a vote on the full floor with the guys here and to see where it lands. There is some question about, do you do a date certain rather than the trigger that would put these lights up not being punitive is when the power is repurchased and a new contract is made. And for some of the new farms that are 20 years signed up contracts right now, that seems like a long time for those people looking at the lights. And if the House changes that to a date certain, it'll go into a conference committee process and then sort out the details. I had a colleague years ago that would say, what's the worst that could happen if this bill doesn't pass? It stays the same. And I don't think that's what we want in Kansas when we have this new technology that can turn off these lights when they're not needed.
Is that technology available nationwide, or other states using it?
And we would be the first state to do retro and prospective at the same time. So be a role model for other states to follow us. And the wind industry is behind us. They support this. And it's people talking to each other, finding the right solution on moving forward together as a team, which it should be.
Did I read that there was also concern, obviously the aircrafts need to know that those are out there, but did I also read something about, you mentioned about flocks of geese being detected. Does it not help birds stay away from them? If, in other words, they would not be attracted to lights that aren't lighting up?
I didn't hear that in the testimony, but it sure sounds reasonable, doesn't it? How sensitive it is, because we have had pilots worried that the lights wouldn't turn on in time. But if it's sensitive enough to pick up flocks of birds, then I think it's very technical, and it's advancing even as we're speaking too.
All right. We do have someone on the phone line with us now. Sandy from Russell, what is your question or comment this evening?
Pardon?
Yes, go ahead, Sandy. You're on the air.
Okay, I had a question for elected officials about why we get a raise our capers.
Did we hear that, all of that questions about capers? Okay, all right. So Sandy from Russell has a question about capers. Would you like to address that, Troy?
Yeah, I can address that. So that's one of the items in the last couple of years that many have been resurfacing and bringing up the idea of a cost of living adjustment for capers. And we had a discussion. I was actually the chairman of the Special Interim Committee on State Employee Compensation and Benefits. And we had an in-depth conversation with Alan Conroy, who's the Executive Director for the Kansas Public Employment Retirement System, or CAPERS. And now I will admit, in the late 90s, there were adjustments made. And those adjustments were made by the legislature. And what has been expressed is that CAPERS, depending on, there's 3 tiers with CAPERS. There's the tier 1, which is the historic version of CAPERS. There's a tier 2, which is more modified. Then there was a tier 3 that was actually instituted in 2015, making it, if you're in tier 3, more like a pension / 401k model. So your benefit depends on how much you contribute as an employee into your particular retirement plan to make it look more like a 401k as to a traditional pension. Your tier 1 and your tier 2, which has the bulk of the beneficiaries with CAPERS, is classified as a pension, a defined benefit. So when you enter into CAPERS, you know by your years of service and your salary what you're going to be paid as far as a benefit when you actually retire. And generally with pensions, there's no adjustments. There's no cost of living adjustments. Now, as I prefaced before, that did happen in prior years, but with a defined benefit plan, technically there are no adjustments that are made because you enter into the agreement knowing what your benefit is going to be. Alan Conroy also expressed that if we would do either a one-time or if we would do a permanent cost of living adjustment, it would have consequences on the unfunded actuarial liability that we have with CAPERS, which is right now sitting around $6 billion. And that could compound and make the unfunded actuarial liability even higher. So there are a lot of concerns in regards to how we move forward with the cost of living adjustment. As I mentioned, it's becoming more topical in these last couple of years because we have been having the ending balances. Also, when you start looking at the outlying years, as far as fiscal year 25, 26, and 27, that ending balance gets smaller and smaller each year after that. So we have to be careful how we move forward, and having a cost of living adjustment is one of those.
You talked about the, I don't know if I should say excess money that the state has. I don't know that we would actually consider it excess, but have we not put quite a bit of money into CAPERS just recently thanks to that?
Actually, in the last, 2 legislative sessions, there was one where we passed a bond of $1 billion. And that was about 3 years ago we did that. Prior to that, we put $500,000 into it. $500 million, not $500,000. And then last year, we put about $1.2 billion towards the unfunded actuarial liability to bring that down. Now, what happened is when we put the $1.2 billion in last year and brought the unfunded actuarial liability down, then the CAPERS board met and lowered our rate of return that we're going to be receiving on the investments with CAPERS. So then that put it back up a little bit because our return is not going to be as high as was expected to be.
All right. Sandy, thank you for your question. If you have a question or comment of the legislators this evening, be sure and give us a call. It's toll free. The number is 1-800-337-4788. Jim, I'd like to move over to you now and talk about water a little bit, as we mentioned, and you talked about how busy you were, especially at the beginning of the session, with the House Water Committee. It seems like there has been a lot of activity that we haven't seen in previous years, and the importance of water to the entire state of Kansas, but especially in western Kansas, is becoming more knowledgeable, and people are becoming more knowledgeable of it across the entire state. Tell us what has changed. Anything?
I think people's perception of or immediate need to deal with it has changed tremendously. Representative Ron Highland did an amazing job over 2 years, and we had a dedicated House Water Committee that studied this 5 days a week. And we had some excellent presentations. We educated lots of people, but also in the background, the environment we deal in, the drought from this last summer, and actually we're kind of going into our second to third year of this drought in many areas of the state, heightened the awareness, and also at the federal level, the Colorado River Valley and the Central Valley of California. So it's kind of like a perfect storm of a lot of things coming together. Representative Highland came in with a very good bill last year that was 283 pages long. It was a little bit too much for us to really dig into deeply there near the end of the session. We broke that down this year, and my committee only has a couple days a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but we've had some excellent presentations that we're taking those same concepts, and he utilized some concepts that were discussed during a 2016 Blue Ribbon Task Force. And just prior to that, Governor Brownback had done a water visioning.
Yes.
It's been going on for 40 years, and the can's been kicked down the road a lot of times. In 2011, there was really the last major legislation that came out that gave groundwater management districts the ability to develop LEMAs, local enhanced management areas, and we've always had IGUCAs before that, but we also were introduced to water conservation areas, and that allows local producers to voluntarily band together and reduce within their region and affect the decline of the aquifer, especially out west. But I think the entire state kind of stepped up with, we're looking at sedimentation in reservoirs. We're looking at all kinds of things. On Thursday of this week, I guess that was yesterday morning, we had Toby from the city of Hayes,
Yes,
their
the city
manager,
manager, Toby Doherty.
gave us an amazing presentation on how well Hayes has conserved water. He's telling us 84 gallons per person per day, where many places here in the state it's 150 to 250 gallons per person per day. We took the approach in the Water Committee this year that it's not an issue that's rural or urban, it's not Republican, it isn't Democrat. We were all the same, we worked together, and we've come out with two very good bills, in my opinion, that are bipartisan, that went through our committee unanimously. They went to the House floor. One was 116 to 6, the other was 119 to 3. They were very well received, and we're hoping to move those along in the Senate to make some very good progress on what we need to do here in the state of Kansas. It's only a beginning. We've kind of put together a framework. One of the bills, 5 years of long-term funding for the Kansas Water Plan, which would produce about $300 million over 5 years, where we're seeing some of our adjacent states, they're telling us Colorado's around $160 million per year that they devote to water issues. South Dakota, $200 million. In North Dakota, they dedicated part of their Bakken oil revenue, big chunk to education and a similar chunk to water, and that's in the $225 million per year. Kansas Water Office has been surviving on $22 million per year. We think that's pitiful, and we're trying to increase the long-term funding. We're asking for a carve-off of the current sales tax to sunset within 5 years. It would be 1.231% of our current sales tax collected across the entire state of Kansas. We currently dedicate 17% to transportation, and that's very well justified. We need transportation in our infrastructure,
Sure.
but I will argue that water, one of our natural resources, deserves at least that 1.2%, if not a lot more. I'm a cheerleader for more, so I'm saying this is just a beginning.
And I might mention too that there is a dedicated water sales tax in the city of Hayes that goes towards these conservation measures that Mr. Doherty was talking about to the committee. So not unheard of, being done on a local level there, so that, you know, the state certainly could follow suit. We have a couple of people who have some questions and comments waiting to talk to our legislators this evening. First of all, let's go to the phones and get to Larry, who's calling from Smith Center. Larry, you have a comment or question this evening?
Yeah, I was calling about the House Bill 2036 and Senate Bill number 58. Whether is there a chance of them passing this year? Tax exempt status for veterans.
Are you aware of what those are about and the contents?
I'm not on tax. Are you on tax?
No.
We might not have a good answer for you, Larry, because we're not on those committees, but we're talking about veterans benefits.
Yes, and when we learn oftentimes of it, if we're not on, in this case, the tax committee, in our caucus meetings, and then on the Senate floor. So far this hasn't been, 58 in the Senate hasn't been brought up in either one of those places, but I'll sure jot it down. And there's an excellent chance it's had a hearing and it's still in committee, and it just hasn't been voted out to send to the full floor for debate.
And I would have to check with 2036. I believe that is the one that was introduced by Representative Proctor, which would make the veterans retirement income tax exempt for the state of Kansas.
Ah.
I believe that's it, but I will have to check with Representative Proctor to make sure that that's
Sure.
the correct bill that he had introduced.
All right. Thank you for your question, Larry. And then we also have this evening from Russell. Nick has a question or comment of the legislators. Nick?
Yes, I was wondering, Mr. Waymaster was speaking about, capers and how some changes have been made, and I think he also spoke about how he's on a subcommittee to talk about, compensation for the state workforce and that sort of thing, and some of the struggles there. What does the panel think about the changes that Troy described in capers and how that could be affecting recruitment and retention? And I was also curious what the thoughts are regarding the bill about the retention bonuses and that sort of thing as well. So I appreciate everyone's comments. Thank you.
On the retention bonuses just this week in appropriations. So in regards to capers, obviously that's part of the benefit package that the state offers to our state employees, along with health insurance and other benefits. And actually the state of Kansas is very competitive with other states as far as what we offer our employees. Where we do fall short is actually in pay. And so we had an extensive conversation in regards to how much we pay our employees, and actually the Department of Administration supplied a pretty lengthy document to the special committee, and it showed every single employee class and type for the state of Kansas, whether or not they are below market, at market, or above market. And sad to say, we have many positions throughout the state of Kansas that is described as being below market. Most are at market, but then we also do have many positions that are above market. And so the approach that we made in regards to that particular subject as far as pay itself, and when the governor introduced her budget, she wants a 5% across the board pay increase. Well, you can do that, but at the same time, you're only widening that disparity between the below market and the above market. So what we're trying to address in appropriations is, okay, let's target the below market employees specifically. What would it cost to bring them to market? And the definition of being at market by the Department of Administration is either 10% above or 10% below. But we want to get within the 5% variance. So how much is it going to cost to bring those employees that are deemed as being below market to at market, have the 5% pay increase for those employees that are at market, But if you are an employee that is deemed at being 10% or more above market, you would not be subject to the 5% pay increase. The reason being is because we're trying to balance the playing field. We're trying to make all of the positions in the state of Kansas at market. And so then we can move forward and then talk about pay increases. But until we actually make that balancing effort, we're only going to keep widening the disparity as far as the pay for our state employees. The other item that we discussed in that special committee, which actually the governor and I had a lengthy conversation about this, and she was in agreement, is that we need to stop doing pay increases across the board. We need to start looking at them as far as market regions. And the reason why I say that is because we had an example with the Norton Correctional Facility that has a starting wage of $18.16 an hour. But on the Nebraska side, there is a correctional facility that's in close proximity, probably within an hour, hour and a half. Their starting wage in Nebraska is $28 an hour. So they're attracting our employees to work in Nebraska because they're paying a much higher wage.
Yes.
And so you could look at, especially in regards to our state hospitals and our correctional facilities. We need to start weaning ourselves from, let's just do a pay increase for all of them, because all of them have their own separate issues and needs, and we need to start looking at them as different markets. The other example was Larned. So Larned has a massive campus, the only one in the state that has a correctional facility and a state hospital. So the dynamics of Larned are different than Osawatomie. It's different than El Dorado. So we need to start looking at market regions and what's going in the markets in regards to pay, as opposed to let's just do a blanket policy.
Makes sense. Long train of thought, you mentioned Larned. I understand that they are in dire need of employees, that they are just don't have enough.
A scary fact for the state budget is that on an annual basis, we spend $50 million a year just at Larned for contract nurses.
Oh, really?
Yes.
So so there are employees there, maybe not enough, but
Yeah.
but spending that kind of extra money.
Because we can't fill those vacancies. So we have to contract the nurses, and that comes at a higher cost.
Sure. Interesting. Again, if you have any comments or suggestions or things that you'd like to talk to the legislators about this evening, give us a call. The number is toll-free, 1-800-337-4788. And I wanted to move to something that's near and dear to everybody's heart, property tax in Kansas. And Elaine, you handed this to me, some information that was given to you, all of you legislators, to kind of some talking points about how it actually works. But I understand that you're getting a lot of flack that my property taxes went up, and Representative, it's your fault. So what are you going to do about it?
She pointed at you, Jim.
I've had that gesture many times, yes. As a county commissioner for 26 years, we hired at the county level an individual that was qualified to be the appraiser. They have to have so many hours of mass appraisal. They were hired by the counties, but they actually do the bidding of the state property valuation department. And it doesn't do any good to talk to the commissioners, because they hire someone to provide the services on a 4-year contract, and that's the appraisers are supposed to look at what the market out there is. It seems like we're in a point of inflation. There's lots and lots of money coming out of DC. That's part of our wage disparity also. An engineer that we want to hire for $55,000 at the Division of Water Resources can go to a private company for $90,000 a year to start with. We're behind what the private industry is because they're looking at all those federal dollars coming in. But that's also fueling everything within our economy. As the housing market goes up, for one thing, we're short on housing. That's why one of the reasons last year the state, instead of $2 million on housing, pumped in about 57 million, greatly increased the availability of funds out there to construct homes. But in a given neighborhood, there's only so many currently there, and the cost of construction now is tremendously increased from a couple years ago. Therefore, the value of those homes go up on the market, and the appraiser's modeling follows that. In my home community, last year we saw homes go up 50%.
Wow.
They've gotten a little behind on the modeling. This year they went up another 18 to 20%, and at the same time we're seeing our ag land slightly turned down. Ag land is appraised entirely differently. It's a use value, and that's set in our Kansas Constitution, and it will remain use value. It doesn't follow what the agricultural or the market, the actual auction price for land. Your house will. So there are two different methods that we're seeing right now, but
Well, this is the topic we were hearing at coffee, so this is why I requested some information from the Department of Revenue, and they're very helpful laying out what's in Constitution, what's in statute, what's the county commissioner's duties, and then what's the appraiser's duty. So it's very, very comprehensive and very easy to understand, but they receive their assessed value notices and then instantly think their property taxes will go up. But that's not necessarily true, because the county commissioners can lower the mill levy as well. So they can go hand in hand, but then it's very important that's a local level decision. And then some things that we've done the last couple of years, like truth in taxation, we've increased the $20,000 to $40,000.
Exemption.
Like the exemption, and there's even discussion at making that $65,000, and I'm not sure where that tax bill has went. But this is a really common question we're asked at coffee, so we're prepared when we go out to speak about this. And really it's education on, rather than saying blame your state legislator, it's not that simple. It's don't blame your county commissioners either. So it's very well thought out, and the Department of Revenue is happy to talk to anyone about this process as well.
Is this online where people could easily access it?
Well, that's an excellent question. It should be, if it's not, and I can bring that point up to them.
I think it would be helpful. I'm curious, is there a difference between rural areas evaluation versus the urban areas, or does it just depend on the market?
it's done by neighborhoods or
by neighborhoods,
by
okay.
areas. But it kind of ties back to 1992 when the state took over school finance and assessed 35 mills for school finance. There was also an effort to make fair and equitable valuations across the entire state. So a home in Bunker Hill would be valued at comparable sales in the very close neighborhood. The same thing over in Russell and Hayes. The same home in each of those locations might be slightly different, but it's trying to be as fair and equitable as possible. Location does make a difference. Every realtor tells me anyway. But I guess we could blame the realtors as much as anybody because the price is going up. But I probably will. I know a few.
Again, our number to call this evening, if you have a comment or question to the legislators, toll-free 1-800-337-4788. Elaine, I wanted to turn back to you because you got, I think it was this week or maybe the tail end of last week, you got to do something totally fun and artsy regarding the Capitol. Tell us what's going to happen there.
And actually it's very exciting for this part of our state too. The governor has signed 2 bills so far into law, and they both came out of a committee called Capital Preservation, which I serve on. And the idea of this committee, so many committees through the decades have piled into this one. Anything that happens in the Capitol or on the Capitol complex grounds goes through this committee. So you can't just go slap a plaque on the wall. You can't just go paint something on the wall. It has to be approved. Yes, and that
got in trouble.
Yeah, this is true. You can't put I dedicated this building without permission from the Capitol Preservation. So a new plaque had to be made. It was changed. So
I didn't even remember that.
Yeah, they installed a plaque in the Capitol, and then that had to be removed.
This is true, and that's an excellent point of why this committee is important. But Senate Bill 11 is the Ad Astra project, and so there's an 8-foot, 2-inch Indian in Salina downtown at an artist studio for 20 years that has not been paid for. But if you came to the Capitol complex grounds on the west side of the building, is a pedestal that says, on this pedestal stands an exact 8-foot replica of Ad Astra, which is 22 feet, by the way, that's on top. And it was used as a fundraising technique to raise money to place the Indian on the top of the Capitol. But anyway, the plans were always to bring this to Topeka, and the artist was never paid for it. So through the years, this project just kind of fell through the cracks. We put together a subcommittee to search out the details, and it was really interesting because the revisers, the lawyers who work for us in the Capitol, went out to the Historical Museum and dug through minutes of all these different committees who looked at this and discovered, as the lead reviser said, that the little guy was never paid for. So this is the mechanism for fundraising. We think the funds will come in right quickly now. And there also is gobs of bricks, hundreds and hundreds of bricks that say people's names on them. And they bought these bricks knowing that this is the fundraising for the Ad Astra project, but they need to be placed in this plaza as well. So that will happen. So that, yay for Salina, that our Indian will come to Topeka on his pedestal, which has been empty for 20 years.
And then there's also a mural that's
Yes,
going
it's
to...
the 1st Regiment of Black Soldiers in Kansas. And so that will be placed somewhere in the Capitol, and it was the second bill she signed. A subcommittee has been formed, and they'll determine the location in the Capitol. So there's a lot of work to that, and putting out RFPs. And in the past, like the Brown versus Board of Ed, it went out nationwide, and we chose the Kansas artists. So we do pay attention to where these artists and their rendition of what they think it should look like. And there is a fellow in Jewell County who has asked me many, many years for this. And I'm sure that he's looking at this project. So just being signed last week, so both of those can move forward. And that's another fundraising opportunity as well. So it's a fascinating committee to be on, that we preserve the history and integrity of the building. And if I don't hog this, I can tell you one more story.
Oh, let's hear it.
This one is not Capitol preservation because it is not going to be on the Capitol grounds, but there's a Liberty Bell. There was 54 made in the early 50s, given to each state and the provinces or the territories. And we discovered this a couple years ago because people are coming in with the passport to our tourist guides saying, we want to see your Liberty Bell. Well, as we searched for the Liberty Bell, which was out on display since the reconstruction or remodel of our Capitol, right now it's in storage in the parking garage in a locked closet stored with the carpet remnants. And the tour guides will take people down to see the Liberty Bell that's in 4 pieces. It's not necessarily broken, it's very huge. So much that it doesn't fit through some doorways in the Capitol. Oh. So the plans are now to bring it out and put it in front of the docking building after it is yes, and it'll be right out front as a focal point. But it's not a project of Capitol preservation. However, we brought it to light of where could we put this if we're going to put it somewhere, and the Department of Administration said we have the perfect spot for it. So we're excited that this bell will come back out, and then we don't take people down the basement to see this Liberty Bell, and we're the only one that's not on display.
Oh, really?
And we probably need to fix that one as well.
Oh, we'll look for it.
And all these projects are delayed, and that one, well, 20 years. These projects have just laid out there for 2 decades that just needed some breath of fresh air brought into it, and so a few reasons to come to the Capitol as a tourist.
Yes,
Yeah.
we'll look for those. We have another phone caller with us this evening. Charles, you're on the air. We have a question or comment?
Yes, ma'am, I do have a question. Why is the legislature passing out the voucher program for schools? I think that would hurt public schools. That's the first part of my question. My second question is, why aren't cedar trees, eastern red cedar trees, considered natural to be noxious weeds?
With the school vouchers and...
Yes, we had that this week.
Yes, there's been some action on that. So bring us up to date, Troy.
So we had a very lengthy debate on Tuesday in regards to Senate Bill 83. And Senate Bill 83 would establish education savings accounts, which would allow, in essence, it would allow public dollars to go into a saving account for a child, and if a parent decides to send their child to a private school. So it is the funneling of money, public money, to private institutions. We had a first bill on that, and it was House Bill 2118. And 2118 was just the education savings accounts. And after many meetings, I'm sure Jim was in those meetings, as was I, in the Speaker of the House's office, trying to convince us to vote for the bill and want to know our rationale for not supporting the bill. Were we in the same meeting?
I think we were in different time
We were
periods.
different time periods?
Yeah, I don't remember
Yeah,
you and
and-
mine.
Anyway, so you actually had very robust conversation about why people did not particularly like this bill. And what was emphatically obvious is most of the Republican delegation that did not support this were rural. Because, I'm sorry, education and the schools in our small communities is an economic lifeline. And if we start going down the path of diverting public dollars to private institutions, we're only accelerating the closure of those schools. And as I expressed in the Speaker's office, as I'm dealing with a school closure right now.
Which one is that?
It's Wilson,
Wilson.
closing grades 7 through 12.
Ah.
And I said, I cannot divert money from public schools to private schools. So after the meetings that they had with us about 2118, they were like, okay, we're not going to get the votes to pass it. So let's put some lipstick on the pig. So that's what they did. They put on the $72 million that the governor requested in her budget for special education, and then there was also there was a pay increase with the additional funds that K through 12 is receiving in fiscal year 2024 for pay increases for teachers. There are some concerns I have about the special education one, and that namely has to do with the relationship with Congress and the state on how much they should be paying, because they should be paying 40%, and the state should be making it up to the 92%. However, right now Congress is not paying their 40%, so everybody's wanting us to pay it up to 92%. I have a problem with that. So there are two aspects with that bill that I had an issue with, which actually made it easy to vote no for. And the other is my wife serves on the school board. So she and I have had lengthy conversations. I've had conversations with the president of the school board and members that she serves with, very gravely concerned about what would happen. And after the vote, I had a meeting with the chairperson for the K-12 Education Budget Committee, somewhat, and without cause. I mean, she was upset with my vote. And I explained to her, I said, you have to understand, I lived in a community when the school closed. And what that was like for that community when they had to realize that they were no longer going to have any type of educational institution in their town.
And which town are we talking about?
That was Luray.
Okay.
And I said, and then if you look at pretty much one of the last businesses on Main Street, which was a bank, pulled out of Luray in January. And so now economic activity has stopped in that small community. And there was just no way I could vote for Senate Bill 83.
I was definitely a no vote. I was early. I don't want public dollars to go to private education. They are not treated the same. They aren't accredited. They don't have to accept students in the same manner. We were shown lots and lots of statistics about the student performance in public schools versus private schools. I know they've done some of this in other states, and we have a small amount of it over the last couple of years on the Promise Scholarship Act. But I was not willing to move this any farther forward. I have 20 school districts and 18 different superintendents. One of my school districts at Healy, I believe, is the smallest school district in the state with 40 students, K through 12. And I hear from urban legislators that you should just close those things down. I say no. That's the local decision. That's for the people in that district to make. It's not the state. I really strongly support local control. My superintendents, the teachers were against it. On a given Friday night in a town of 4,000, there's 1,500 people sitting in the football stadium, and I'd say another 1,000 of us older guys at home in our recliners watching it on the big screen. It's part of our identity in towns out here and the school districts that we have, and we want to preserve that. it seems like it changes across the state. If you're in Wichita, to be a true blue conservative Kansan Republican, you need to vote for school choice. In Western Kansas, we want to support our public schools. And we view the issue entirely differently. And not to say that either one of us is right or wrong, but I voted to represent my district.
I might mention there's some procedural things here that doesn't sit well with me, where some of the provisions. Yeah. So the provisions that, if it had come, well, it's been sent to a conference committee, but many of those positions that in the House coming over to the Senate have never had a Senate Education Committee hearing. So not only a hearing, it hasn't had a committee vote, and it hasn't had a full Senate vote. So I would be voting on something that I don't even know about coming from the other chamber. And not, it didn't pass by very much, 64 to 61. And that's really tight to say. It's not an overwhelming amount to come over to the Senate and say, just agree with us. So instantly, I was going to be a no on that, just for the fact of everything that the fellows have mentioned, but just doing the proper vetting of what an idea, a bill, which is simply an idea, is. And a proper vetting on both sides, I think, is important. So that it was not going to be voted off the Senate floor as it came over.
We have the second half of Charles' question or comment that he had with talking about cedar trees, and he was questioning whether they are or should be a noxious weed. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, he wants them classified as a noxious weed.
That's the way it sounded.
Yeah.
Depends on where you're at. A weed's defined by a plant in the wrong location. In my windbreaks in Scott County, I walk them. They're hardy enough to survive, but if I out in my pasture grazing, I understand I wouldn't want them there.
I've spent many hours on a tractor mowing and cutting the cedar trees down in the pastures. So I'd have to agree with Charles. They probably should be, in some ways, deemed a noxious weed, but that goes through the entire process where the Secretary of Agriculture then deems it a noxious weed. And then it has to go through a legislative process as well.
I think obviously it depends on where you are exactly. We have about 5 minutes left in the show. If you have a quick comment or question of our legislators, that toll-free number, 1-800-337-4788. Elaine, I wanted to return to you. Were there any other bills you really wanted to talk about?
An interesting one for us that I discovered over the summer when people were stopping me on the street asking me why we pay sales tax on meat processing at our locker plants. Because they're confusing this with, our sales tax is dropping 2 cents every year, graduated scale. So there was confusion of sales tax on the meat, but also you're charged sales tax on a service of chopping up that meat, if you will. So we have learned through these conversations that Nebraska does not have sales tax on the service of processing meat. So there is a bill that has had a hearing in the Senate and is now waiting to be brought above the line in the Senate. But knowing that this is rural Kansas and where we represent along the top of Kansas bordering Nebraska, there's an excellent chance that would move. And actually the tax chairman on the House said, I was thinking about introducing that. So I would say it has an excellent chance of becoming law for us. We'll have to follow that all the way through. And is our last day April 29th, right?
Yes.
So it's a really quick, that'll be here before we know it. And it's quicker than normal. We're usually still there in May some. So that's probably time we would know about that one.
And this we're talking about the process, it's the meat process.
Yeah, so think of it as service. Like we don't pay sales tax when we have our hair cut or when we have our nails done. It's sales tax on a service. So that's the premise of removing this. Although the confusion started with sales tax on food.
Sure. We have another one of our viewers this evening who would like to make a question or ask a question or make a comment. Debbie from Ford County, go ahead, please.
Yes, I want to know where you stand on Senate Bill 252 and Senate Bill 248. Thank you.
Do we know?
I think 248 is the no sales tax on food totally.
Oh,
yeah, totally. Yes. Yeah, taking sales tax, and it's passed out of the Senate over to the House. I had a problem with this bill because when we remove The 248 proposal moves sales tax totally to zero, which also removes the locals, the county and the cities that already have their sales tax in place.
Right.
I don't believe that's right. So that it's over in the House now for discussion. The governor has her plan of axe the tax, but what's not mentioned in that, it's only taking it down to the local levels. It will never be zero. So moving this to zero totally and removing the local input, I just didn't think that was fair to how we operate with our local governments and how our local governments choose to spend the sales tax money that they have.
That they need.
And
there was a hearing in the House Tax Committee on 248 this past week.
In Hayes, Toby said that your conservation water measures are paid for with a dedicated sales tax.
Yes.
You take food out of that sales tax, and that's quite a cut to that budget. In Scott County, we have a half-cent sales tax that's dedicated to the retirement of a $25 million bond on a new hospital. Every community has an issue with the local sales tax, and therefore I don't think 248 stands a chance, to be honest. And I'm a proponent of maybe not going to entirely zero on the state sales tax. I could stop at 2. I'd love to see some property tax relief. Local ad valorem tax reduction fund hasn't been funded since 2002. It's state money that comes in from income sales or whatever, goes back to local units of government to lower property taxes. I think property taxes have gotten far more out of hand than some of our others, and sales taxes may be a more fair tax.
Couple of big issues there. Well, panelists, thank you so much this evening. We really appreciate you joining us. We've had visiting this evening with Representative Jim Minnix of Scott City, also Representative Troy Waymaster of Bunker Hill, and Senator Elaine Bowers of Concordia. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for your service to all of us at Kansas. Thank you for joining us this evening. We're so glad that you could. I'm Becky Kaiser. Good night.
In our increasingly electrified society, that's where a resilient grid matters most. ITC Great Plains builds, operates, and maintains electric transmission infrastructure, connecting consumers to lower-cost energy sources to power our energy future. That means safe, secure, reliable electricity for those we serve. Learn more at itc-holdings.com.